Okay, so good morning. So this is our second part of our fungus lecture and the kingdom of fungi. Um, so last time we discussed some of the different um, characteristics of all fungus. That is, it is a heterotrophic organism that has a cell wall made of chitin, and its body was made up of filaments called hyphae that collectively all lumped together was the mycelium. We talked about the classification of different kinds of fungus. Our four different groups were the Ascomycota or the sac fungi, the Basidiomycota, which were the club fungus, the Deuteromycota, which were the imperfect fungus, which are kind of a random group. And then we had the Zygomycota, which were the common molds. So those are some of the different fungus that we can look at. You guys have been sending me some pictures, and I saw a lot of some club fungus and some looks like of the molds. So I wouldn't expect to see much of the other ones. Anyway, so today what we want to focus on is the fungal ecology. Let's go ahead and put that to a large screen. And so we want to talk about what is the role of fungus in the world. I mean, what does it do? We know that plants, are producers, they are autotrophs, they make their own food, and they provide food for other organisms by doing photosynthesis. So what good is fungus? Well, they are heterotrophs just like us, and they eat things. We know that they are able to externally digest their food, and so they spend a lot of time doing just that. And so in our natural ecosystems, they function as decomposers. They function as symbionts. That is, they live in a beneficial, mutualistic relationship with other organisms. And they can also even function as parasites. That is, they can live on other organisms to the detriment of an organism. So as far as decomposers, many fungus are saprobes. That's a term that for an organism that lives off of really dead organic matter. So when you see, let's say, a mushroom popping up out of a tree stump, that's a good example of this. One of the things that fungus can do that a lot of other organisms cannot do is they're really good at breaking down things like wood and cellulose. We had talked about cellulose being that structural component, that structural carbohydrate that makes wood be what it is, makes it nice and strong. It's hard to break down. We can't just take a piece of wood like that and just eat it. Most things can't. And so fungus they can break that down. It takes a while, but they have nothing else to do. But they are able to decompose that. And so they can take some decaying trees or leaves or whatever, they can break it down to obtain food and then liberate those molecules and carbons that were locked up in that and liberate that to go back into the carbon cycle or back into soil. And so that's a really essential function to recycle nutrients in an ecosystem. Yes, bacteria are very important decomposers. I would argue that fungus, in terms of recycling plant material, are just as important. Here's a great example of that. This is a picture I took of just a tree out in the woods. And we can see on this tree that it's slowly breaking down and there's fungus growing on it. And really, remember, this is just the external structure. So the mycelium, the actual part of the organism itself, is embedded inside of the little fibers inside of that tree. And it's digesting the tree internally. And that allows it to kind of break down, and some of it's going to fall on the ground, and it's going to help produce more soil. So that's a great example of just some really, really common shelf fungus that we see all over the place. There is a few lichens growing on here. I can see some there and some there. Lichens are another important fungal organism. Some fungus can be parasitic. Athlete's foot is a good example. When you have athlete's foot, there is a fungus that is living inside of your tissues and is secreting digestive enzymes and is eating you for dinner, which is why it feels bad. It can cause a lot of diseases in plants and animals. It is estimated that up to 15% of crops in temperate regions are lost to fungus. That's either from something like wheat rust, would be a good example. Fruit mildew. Have you ever bought a thing of strawberries and like 2 days later, the strawberries are all like going crazy with the big fungus mold on top, and it looks like it has a big poofy fungus hair. So that's, fruit mildew is a pretty big deal. So we want to kind of avoid fungus eating our food before we get to it, but it does cause some loss. They're just doing what they know to do. They are going ahead and they are decomposing things, but we try to beat them to it. So that's these are like downsides about fungus. There are many other fungal diseases in humans, in animals as well. This is just a few of them. Mold spores can get in your respiratory system, and you can have mold living in your lungs, which is obviously not a good thing. So there's lots of other ways that this can be problematic. Fungus and symbiotic relationship. On a happier note, a symbiotic relationship is mutualistic. Both parties benefit. And here's a really good example of this. So here we have a plant with its roots, right? It's in the soil. The white part of this is a fungus, and that fungus is actually coating the plant roots, and they are working, and this is really crazy, but it's a wonderful thing that plants and the fungus start to exchange nutrients between each other. Because the fungus can break down things, they can break down organic material in the soil and then pass along some of those nutrients to the plant root. In return, the plant is doing photosynthesis and producing carbohydrates or sugars, and it's giving those to the fungus to help support its own life. And so it's actually a really great thing. This was not well understood in the past several years. You're starting to see a lot more focus on this, even from a large-scale agricultural perspective. They're realizing how beneficial mycorrhizae are to all crops, doesn't matter what it is. So this is just really super beneficial. We probably don't really understand how beneficial it is even at this point. Lichens are another example that I mentioned. Here are lichens growing on rocks. Yes, on rocks. So lichens are a fungus and an algae or a cyanobacteria that are living together. They are also in a symbiotic relationship. Remember, fungus is all these strands, and algae is also in strands. And so they make it like a really dense mat of their bodies and make these lichens. And they can live on a rock. Now, this is crazy. Now, the cool thing is that algae can do photosynthesis. Fungus cannot. Fungus can break things down. Algae aren't very good at it. So what happens is that fungus will be on a bark or a rock. Those are lichens there. In fact, all those discolored patches are really lichens. And so that fungus is able to break down some of that rock and get some mineral nutrients from it and protect the algae. Well, the algae can chill out and do photosynthesis. And the two work together to support each other's life. Now, that's really nice. That makes lichens a major pioneer species. That is, they can live on bare rock. If you start to look for lichens, you'll find them growing on trees. You'll find them growing on the sides of your house. You'll find them growing on the roof of your house, on like your shingles. They'll be growing on old metal implements. They can really essentially grow almost anywhere on like bare metal that sets out long enough. So this is amazing because as they live and die, they create bits of organic material, and that is the basis for soil. So not only do these guys break the rock down a little bit, they add organic matter to that. You take ground up rock and you take organic matter, that's what soil really is. So these are really, really super important. And they're pretty cool when you start looking around for them because they are everywhere. Let me go back real quick and show you this image. So this is an image of some mycorrhizae. These are fungal hyphae, or the filaments that make up the body of the fungus. These are plant roots. And so those plant roots and those fungal filaments are actually working together. Those filaments help increase surface area. They pass nutrients to the root passes nutrients to the filaments, and it makes the plant overall more healthy, which is really great. Here's another example of what we consider a limestone glade area. Many of you, if you've been out around this area, occasionally you'll just stumble upon an area that has a bunch of barely covered rocks protruding from the ground. That's typically limestone, and it produces these really interesting areas that have lots of lichens, and there's a little bit of mosses that are able to begin to grow here. And this is great. This is what lichens are good for. Okay, we'll go ahead and we will stop there, and when we get back together, we'll talk a bit more about some different unique fungus in our area.